War does not always end with a massive explosion or a glorious charge. Sometimes, an entire division, over 10,000 men, heavy artillery, and integrated armor, dies a death of 1,000 cuts, forged by arrogance, ignored intelligence reports, and a fatal refusal to retreat. In December 1944, along the fog-shrouded ridges of the Schnee Eifel, a brand-new American division was placed into what senior commanders called a quiet sector for rest and recuperation. It was a tactical graveyard. Within 72 hours of the first enemy barrage, 2 entire regiments were cut off, surrounded, and utterly destroyed. This is not just a story of combat. It is a clinical, minute-by-minute autopsy of a catastrophic command failure under extreme pressure. Welcome to the anatomy of a disaster. By the late autumn of 1944, the Allied advance across Europe had ground to a grinding, exhausting halt. Supply lines were stretched to their absolute breaking point. Ports were choked with wreckage, and fuel was running dry. Supreme Headquarters needed a sector to absorb green, improve in divisions, and let battered veteran units lick their wounds. The Schnee Eifel, a high, rugged, heavily wooded plateau on the German border, seemed ideal. Intelligence reports labeled it a ghost front, a place where nothing ever happened. But in military planning, a sector that nothing happens in is rarely secure. It is simply a blind spot. And into this blind spot stepped the U.S. 106th Infantry Division, the Golden Lions, freshly arrived from the United States, untested, confident, and dangerously isolated. To understand the tragedy that followed, you must look at the human element. The men of the 106th Division were replacements and fresh recruits. Many had never heard a live shell whistle overhead. They were deployed across an impossibly wide front. Nearly 27 miles of rugged, densely forested terrain that seasoned veterans would have struggled to defend. Their flanks were dangling in open air. Their communications were tethered to fragile telephone lines strung through trees vulnerable to shelling, and their leadership from division command down to regimental levels suffered from a fatal combination of administrative rigidity and tactical complacency. They were told they were sent to a quiet zone to learn the ropes. Instead, they were walking directly into the jaw of a hidden tiger. Decisions under pressure are only as good as the information feeding them. In the first week of December 1944, intelligence officers began picking up anomalous signals. Aerial reconnaissance noted unusual railway traffic behind German lines. Partisan reports spoke of massive columns moving through the Eifel Mountains by night. Radio intercept units logged a sudden, profound drop in signal traffic, a classic indicator of an impending communications blackout before a major offensive. Yet at Corps and Army headquarters, these reports were systematically filtered, minimized, or outright dismissed. Why? Because the High Command was entirely focused on their own upcoming offensives further north and south. They needed the Ardennes to be quiet. They convinced themselves that the German army was broken, exhausted, and incapable of mounting a large-scale winter counteroffensive. Confirmation bias became an operational weapon against themselves. The warnings were filed away, ignored, and left to gather dust while the enemy warmed their engines in the snow. At the tactical core of the impending disaster was a fundamental error in spatial logic: dispersion without depth. Standard doctrine dictated that a defensive line must have strong points, mobile reserves, and mutual support networks. Instead, the 106th Division was strung out like a thin, brittle wire across the high ground of the Schnee Eifel, attempting to plug gaps with isolated battalions, sitting ducks in permanent pillboxes, and unreinforced logging cabins. When junior officers on the ground reported hearing the ominous, metallic roar of armored vehicles idling through the freezing night forest just hundreds of yards across the valley, division headquarters responded with bureaucratic apathy. The rigid mindset of senior command refused to entertain the possibility that their comfortable sector could be the primary axis of a historic enemy assault. They ordered units to hold their static positions at all costs, forbidding proactive patrols or tactical repositioning that might disturb the sector. They locked their own units into a stationary trap. At exactly 5:30 hours on December 16th, 1944, the silent winter forest dissolved into absolute hell. Operation Walk am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge, had begun. Over 1,000 German artillery pieces, heavy mortars, and Volkswerfer rocket launchers opened fire simultaneously along the entire front. The barrage did not target troops in the open. It surgically destroyed the nervous system of the 106th Division within the first 20 minutes. Telephone lines were pulverized into copper dust. Command posts were crushed by heavy, high-explosive shells. Young soldiers, jolted out of their deep sleep by the deafening roar, stumbled out into freezing snowdrifts only to find themselves engulfed in fire, smoke, and falling timber. In the command bunkers, commanders realized too late that their communications were entirely severed. They were completely blind, deaf, and isolated. As the infantry barrage lifted, the iron fist followed. Out of the blinding morning fog and heavy falling snow emerged the gray shapes of German assault guns, Panzer IVs, and screaming infantry columns. But the German strategy here was not a direct frontal assault to push the Americans back. It was a classic, ruthless encirclement. The main armored spearheads bypassed the fixed American strongpoints on the high ground of the Schnee Eifel entirely, racing past their flanks to the north and south through the weak valley corridors. Within hours, the 422nd and 423rd Regiments of the 106th Division were swallowed whole, trapped in a high-altitude pocket on the ridge. They were completely cut off from the rest of the division, running low on ammunition, with no artillery support and no escape route. The trap had snapped shut with terrifying precision. This is where the study of military command under pressure becomes a psychological tragedy. When division headquarters finally realized that 2 of their 3 regiments were surrounded on the ridge, a severe paralysis of command took hold. The division commander, Major General Alan W. Jones, was already suffering from severe physical exhaustion and acute stress. The staff was fractured by conflicting reports, outdated maps, and a complete lack of real-time situational awareness. Orders issued from Corps headquarters were contradictory. Hold your positions at all costs, followed immediately by breakout if necessary. But how do you order a breakout when your radios are dead, your roads are blocked by enemy armor, and your men are freezing to death in waist-deep snow? Tactical decision-making broke down entirely under the crushing weight of administrative inertia. Instead of granting immediate discretionary authority to local commanders on the ground to punch through the thinning enemy lines while they still had the strength, higher headquarters dithered, debated, and delayed for precious hours. On the ground, inside the Schnee Eifel pocket, the human reality was heartbreaking. Thousands of young Americans, many of them experiencing their first days in combat, found themselves surrounded by an elite, veteran enemy force operating with ruthless efficiency. Wounded soldiers lay freezing in shallow foxholes where medical supplies had run out hours earlier. Ammunition boxes were empty, rifles jammed from the freezing sleet and mud. Junior officers and non-commissioned officers faced an impossible moral dilemma: continue fighting a futile, suicidal defense against overwhelming armor with rifle calibers that could bounce off a Panzer, or surrender to save the lives of hundreds of freezing, starving kids who had barely begun to live. The pressure cooker of total tactical isolation had stripped away all military abstract theory, leaving behind only raw, brutal human survival. By the afternoon of December 19th, 1944, the inevitable climax arrived. With no ammunition left, no food, no water, and no hope of relief from the outside, the commanders of the trapped regiments made the most agonizing decision a military officer could face. Orders were given to destroy remaining heavy weapons, smash radio crystals, and surrender. Over 7,000 American soldiers laid down their arms on the Schnee Eifel, marking one of the largest mass surrenders of U.S. forces in the European theater of operations during World War II. The entire 106th Infantry Division, deployed just days prior as a proud symbol of fresh Allied strength, had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting unit. The quiet sector had become a slaughterhouse,